It's 480 BC, and the most powerful empire on Earth is about to crush a bunch of quarreling Greek city-states. The Persian Empire stretched from what we now call Pakistan all the way to Macedonia, basically controlling 1/5 of everyone alive at the time. Talk about having a good day at the office. Their king, Xerxes, commanded wealth beyond imagination, armies that seemed endless, and enough ships to darken the seas. On the other side, a collection of Greek cities that spent more time fighting each other than agreeing on where to have lunch. Athens was this new democracy where everyone had opinions. Sound familiar? And Sparta was full of warriors who thought diplomacy meant asking, "How would you like to die?" before stabbing you with a spear. Yet somehow, these Greeks were about to pull off one of the most shocking upsets in human history. This is the story of how clever tactics, desperate courage, and a healthy dose of luck saved Western civilization as we know it. Hey everyone! If you're loving these incredible historical war tales, smash that like button and hit subscribe. We've got so many more epic stories coming your way that'll blow your mind. The trouble started decades earlier when some Greek colonies in modern-day Turkey decided they'd had enough of Persian rule. In 499 BC, these rebels asked their cousins back in Greece for help. Most Greek cities basically said, "Sorry, we're busy washing our hair." But Athens and little Eretria actually showed up with ships and soldiers. Together, they marched inland and burned Sardis, the regional Persian capital, including a sacred temple. The Persians were about as happy about this as you'd expect someone to be when their house gets burned down during a dinner party. King Darius took this personally, very personally. The Persian response was swift and brutal. They crushed the rebellion within 4 years, but Darius wasn't done. He wanted payback against those mainland Greeks who had dared to meddle in his business. So he sent ambassadors to every Greek city demanding earth and water, basically saying, "Submit or else." Most cities looked at the size of the Persian Empire and wisely decided that dirt and water were reasonable gifts. But Athens and Sparta, they had a different idea about hospitality. They threw the Persian ambassadors down wells, supposedly telling them they could find all the earth and water they wanted down there. This was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. History would soon decide which. In 490 BC, Darius sent his first serious expedition to teach the Greeks some manners. After devastating several islands and burning Eretria to the ground, the Persians landed at Marathon, just 26 miles from Athens. The odds looked terrible for the Greeks. They were outnumbered 2-1, but here's where things get interesting. The Greek soldiers, called hoplites, fought in a formation called a phalanx. Imagine a human porcupine made of bronze shields and iron spears. When they charged at Marathon, something remarkable happened. The more lightly armed Persians, used to fighting with bows and lighter weapons, couldn't handle this bronze battering ram of Greek fury. The result? Persian soldiers died by the thousands on that beach while the survivors scrambled back to their ships like tourists fleeing a hurricane. Athens had not only survived but won decisively. The victory was so important that a soldier ran the entire 26 miles back to Athens to deliver the news, and then promptly died from exhaustion. That's why we call long-distance races marathons today. But this victory came with a price. Darius died 4 years later, but his son Xerxes inherited both the throne and a burning desire for revenge. The Greeks had humiliated the world's greatest empire, and that simply could not stand. Xerxes wasn't the type to do anything halfway. When he decided to invade Greece, he planned the largest military expedition the ancient world had ever seen. Ancient sources claim he brought over 2 million men, though modern historians think around 200,000 is more realistic. Still, for the time, this was like bringing a tank to a knife fight. The Persian king ordered engineers to build a bridge of boats across the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Asia from Europe. When storms destroyed the first bridge, Xerxes reportedly had the sea whipped 300 times as punishment. You know you're dealing with serious ego when someone tries to discipline the ocean itself. His fleet was equally massive, over 1,000 warships supplied by Persian allies across the Mediterranean. Phoenicians, Egyptians, and Ionians all contributed their finest vessels. The expedition was so large that ancient writers claimed it drank rivers dry and ate entire regions out of food. Meanwhile, the Greeks were doing what Greeks did best, arguing with each other. But fear has a way of bringing people together, and 31 Greek city-states managed to put aside their differences long enough to form an alliance. They held their strategy meetings at Corinth and later commemorated their unity with a massive bronze serpent column at Delphi, listing all the cities that stood together against the Persian threat. The Greeks initially planned to stop the Persians at a mountain pass near Mount Olympus, but when scouts found the position could be easily outflanked, they fell back to Thermopylae, literally the hot gates, because of nearby sulfur springs. This narrow pass between mountains and sea seemed perfect for defense. King Leonidas of Sparta arrived with 300 of his finest warriors, plus about 6,700 other Greeks from various cities. For 3 days, this small force held off the entire Persian army in some of the most savage fighting the ancient world had witnessed. The Spartans were perfect for this kind of desperate battle. They'd been training for war since childhood, and their society was built around the idea that death in battle was the highest honor. When a Persian messenger arrogantly claimed their arrows would darken the sun, a Spartan warrior supposedly replied, "Good, then we'll fight in the shade." But numbers eventually tell. A local Greek showed the Persians a mountain path that led behind the Greek position. Leonidas, realizing he was about to be surrounded, sent most of his allies away, but stayed with his 300 Spartans, some Thespians and Thebans, to fight to the death. Their sacrifice bought precious time for the Greek fleet and became the stuff of legend. While Leonidas held the pass, the real action was happening at sea. Both Greek and Persian fleets relied on a revolutionary warship called the trireme, basically the ancient world's version of a fighter jet. These vessels were marvels of engineering, 120 feet long but only 18 feet wide, powered by 170 rowers arranged in 3 levels. A trireme could reach speeds of 10 knots and turn on a dime. Its main weapon was a bronze-covered ram, jutting from the bow, designed to punch holes in enemy ships. The trick was to ram the enemy ship and then back away quickly before your own vessel got stuck or counter-attacked. Greek triremes were reportedly built heavier than their Persian counterparts, making them more stable fighting platforms but slightly slower. Persian ships carried more soldiers, 44 compared to the Greeks' 14, but this made them more crowded and harder to maneuver in tight spaces. Each trireme had its own personality, complete with a name and painted eyes on the bow to scare enemies and bring good luck. The crews developed fierce pride in their ships, and experienced teams could perform complex maneuvers that would make modern naval officers dizzy just thinking about them. While Leonidas fought at Thermopylae, the Greek fleet under Spartan Admiral Eurybiades, chosen despite Spartans knowing almost nothing about naval warfare, faced the Persian fleet at Artemisium. This was essentially a 3-day naval boxing match to see who would control the seas. The Persians started with a huge advantage, but Mother Nature decided to even the odds. A massive storm hit the Persian fleet while anchored off the dangerous coast of Magnesia. Hundreds of ships were wrecked and thousands of sailors drowned. Ancient sources claim the Persians also lost an entire squadron of 200 ships trying to sail around the island of Euboea, though some historians think this story might be too good to be true. Even with these losses, the Greeks were still outnumbered nearly 3-1. But they had advantages the Persians didn't expect. The Athenian contingent was brand new, built with silver from mines discovered just 3 years earlier. A politician named Themistocles had convinced the Athenians to spend their windfall on ships instead of cash handouts, a decision that probably saved Western civilization. The fighting at Artemisium was brutal but inconclusive. Both sides blooded each other without achieving decisive victory. But then came terrible news. Thermopylae had fallen, Leonidas was dead, and central Greece lay open to Persian invasion. With the pass lost, the Persian army marched south like a locust swarm, burning everything in sight. The Greek army, dominated by troops from the Peloponnese, retreated to the Isthmus of Corinth and began building a wall to protect their own territories. Athens would be abandoned to its fate. The city's population began a desperate evacuation to nearby islands. Women, children, and elderly were loaded onto every available boat, while able-bodied men prepared for what might be their final battle. The scenes must have been heartbreaking. Families torn apart, treasures abandoned, an entire way of life disappearing onto crowded refugee ships. When Xerxes finally reached Athens, he found it nearly empty. A few diehards had fortified themselves on the Acropolis, believing an oracle that promised Athens would be saved by its wooden wall. They thought this meant the wooden fence around the citadel. They were wrong. The Persians surrounded and slaughtered them, then burned the entire city, including its temples, as payback for the burning of Sardis 18 years earlier. The smoke rising from Athens must have been visible for miles, a black monument to Persian revenge and Greek despair. The alliance seemed finished, the cause lost. Western civilization about to be strangled in its cradle. But Themistocles had a different interpretation of the oracle's wooden wall. He argued it meant Athens' new fleet, the wooden ships that might yet save them all. As Greek naval commanders gathered on the island of Salamis in September 480 BC, he faced the challenge of his lifetime. The Peloponnesian captains wanted to retreat south to protect their own territories. Themistocles knew this would be disaster. In open water, the faster, more numerous Persian ships would destroy the Greeks in detail. But in the narrow straits around Salamis, the Persian numbers would work against them. He warned his allies that if they abandoned him, the 200 Athenian ships would sail west to Italy, leaving the rest to face the Persians alone. This threat worked, barely. The Greeks agreed to fight at Salamis, but Themistocles worried the Peloponnesians might change their minds overnight. So he played one of history's most dangerous bluffs. He secretly sent a trusted servant to the Persian camp with a message. The Greeks were terrified and planning to escape at dawn. If Xerxes wanted to crush them, he should attack immediately. 8 miles away at Phaleron, Xerxes held a war council with his admirals. Everyone advised immediate attack. Everyone except Queen Artemisia of Halicarnassus, the only woman commanding ships in the Persian fleet. She warned that attacking the Greeks at sea was unnecessary and risky. Why not just threaten their territories by land? The Greek alliance would collapse as each city rushed to defend its own soil. Artemisia was absolutely right, but Xerxes wanted the glory of crushing his enemies personally. When Themistocles' messenger arrived with the news that the Greeks were preparing to flee, it seemed to confirm what the king wanted to believe. That night, the Persian fleet put to sea, roughly 600 triremes against 368 Greek ships. They positioned themselves to catch the Greeks trying to escape at dawn, with 400 elite troops landed on tiny Cittalea Island to finish off any survivors who made it to shore. As dawn broke, Xerxes arrived at a throne overlooking the strait, accompanied by scribes ready to record which captains fought well and which showed cowardice. He expected to watch the final act of his conquest of Greece. Instead, he saw 368 Greek triremes emerge from the bays of Salamis in perfect battle formation, singing hymns as they rowed toward his fleet. What followed was perhaps the most important naval battle in human history. The Greeks formed their line with their best squadrons on each flank, Athenians on the left, Aeginetans on the right. At first they held formation, possibly waiting for the morning breeze or for more Persian ships to crowd into the narrow strait. Then one Greek captain saw his chance and attacked. Within minutes, both fleets were locked in desperate combat. In the confined waters, the battle became a churning chaos of ramming ships, screaming men, and splintering wood. The Persians' numbers became a liability. Ships trying to retreat crashed into others trying to advance, their captains desperate to impress the watching king. Persian oarsmen, who had been rowing all night, began to tire, while the fresh Greeks fought with the fury of men defending their homes and freedom. The elite Phoenician squadron, pride of the Persian fleet, suffered terrible casualties against the heavy Greek triremes. Some Phoenician captains who survived the destruction of their ships were brought before Xerxes, where they blamed their defeat on cowardly allies. At that exact moment, the king watched an Ionian ship ram an Athenian trireme before being rammed in turn by an Aeginetan vessel. The Ionian marines then counterattacked, boarding and capturing the Aeginetan ship. Seeing this display of courage, Xerxes ordered the Phoenician captains executed for cowardice. Talk about harsh performance reviews. As the battle turned decisively against the Persians, the narrow strait became a killing ground. The playwright Aeschylus, who probably fought in the battle, later compared the Greeks killing Persians to fishermen spearing tuna. a grim but vivid image of the systematic slaughter. Wrecked ships, corpses, and drowning men clogged the waterway. The Aeginetans particularly distinguished themselves, hitting fleeing Persian ships in the flank as they tried to escape. Their performance was so outstanding that they were later awarded first prize for valor in the battle. Queen Artemisia found herself fleeing for her life with an Athenian trireme in hot pursuit. Seeing her escape route blocked by a friendly ship, she made a ruthless decision. She rammed and sank her own ally. The pursuing Athenian captain, seeing this, assumed she must be fighting for Greece and went looking for other targets. Sometimes survival requires impossible choices. In a final brutal act, the Greek general Aristides landed troops on Cytalaea and massacred the 400 Persian soldiers who had been stranded there. The battle was complete. Approximately 200 Persian ships destroyed and 12,000 men killed, including Aristobulus, Xerxes' own half-brother. Greek losses were minimal, just 40 ships. The defeat at Salamis shattered Persian confidence and Xerxes' dreams of easy conquest. The king who had come to Greece expecting triumph found himself watching his fleet limp back to harbor in tatters. The humiliation was complete and public, witnessed by the king himself and recorded by his scribes. Xerxes now heeded Queen Artemisia's earlier advice. He left General Mardonius with part of the army to continue the campaign, while he returned to Asia with the bulk of his forces. As Artemisia had shrewdly observed, if Mardonius won, the glory would belong to Xerxes. If he lost, the blame would be Mardonius's alone. But there would be no victory for Mardonius. The following summer at Plataea, the combined Greek army crushed the remaining Persian forces. Mardonius himself was killed, along with most of his men. According to Herodotus, on the very same day, the Greek fleet won another decisive victory at Mycale, destroying Persian naval power in the eastern Mediterranean. The threat of Persian conquest was over. More than that, the Greeks were about to go on the offensive, forming the Delian League and beginning campaigns that would liberate Greek cities throughout the Persian Empire. Historians have called Salamis one of the most significant battles in human history, and they're not exaggerating. The victory didn't just save Greece, it preserved the conditions that would create the classical age, the period when Greek art, philosophy, democracy, and science reached heights that still inspire us today. Think about it. If the Persians had won, would we have had Socrates asking uncomfortable questions? Would Plato have written his dialogues? Would Aristotle have tutored Alexander the Great? Would democracy have developed in Athens, providing a model for future civilizations? The Persian Empire, for all its wealth and sophistication, was fundamentally autocratic. Individual cities and peoples maintained their local customs, but ultimate power rested with the great king. Greek city-states, despite their constant bickering, had developed traditions of citizen participation, debate, and intellectual freedom that were revolutionary for their time. Of course, we shouldn't romanticize ancient Greek democracy. It excluded women, slaves, and foreigners, and Athens could be just as imperialistic as Persia. But the Greek victory at Salamis preserved a cultural laboratory where new ideas about politics, philosophy, and human nature could develop and spread. What makes the Battle of Salamis truly compelling isn't just its historical importance, but the human drama involved. Here were ordinary people facing impossible odds, making split-second decisions that would echo through centuries. Consider Themistocles, risking everything on a desperate bluff. If his deception had been discovered, the Greeks might have been destroyed that very night. Instead, his gamble created the conditions for victory. Think about Queen Artemisia, the only woman commanding ships in either fleet, giving Xerxes advice that could have changed the course of the war. Her warning was ignored, but her survival instincts were sharp enough to get her through the disaster that followed. Picture the Persian oarsmen, rowing through the night toward what they thought would be an easy victory, only to find themselves trapped in a narrow strait, facing desperate enemies who had nothing left to lose. Imagine the Greek crews, knowing their cities were burning behind them, their families were refugees, and their civilization hung in the balance. They were fighting not just for victory, but for the right to exist. The Battle of Salamis offers timeless lessons about leadership, strategy, and the power of unity in the face of overwhelming odds. Themistocles showed how clever tactics can overcome superior numbers. The Greek alliance demonstrated that bitter enemies can cooperate when facing existential threats. Perhaps most importantly, Salamis reminds us that history's outcome is never predetermined. The Persian Empire seemed unstoppable, its victory inevitable. Yet human courage, smart planning, and a bit of luck changed everything. The battle also shows us the importance of naval power in controlling trade routes and projecting force across distances. Whoever controlled the seas controlled the ability to move armies, supplies, and information. This lesson would prove relevant again and again throughout history. Before you go, don't forget to smash that like button if this epic tale of ancient warfare got your blood pumping. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories from history. Trust me, we've got battles, betrayals, and brilliant strategies that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest historical adventures. Today, nearly 3,500 years later, the Battle of Salamis continues to inspire. Military academies study its tactics, political scientists analyze its lessons about alliance building. Artists and writers find in it a timeless story of freedom triumphing over tyranny. The strait where the battle took place is now busy with commercial shipping, oil tankers, and passenger ferries. Modern Athens sprawls across the landscape where Persian armies once burned temples and homes. But the memory of those 368 Greek ships and their crews remains vivid, a reminder that sometimes the impossible becomes inevitable when people refuse to surrender their freedom. The victory at Salamis didn't end the story of Greek-Persian conflict, but it changed its trajectory forever. The Greeks had proven that the greatest empire on earth could be defeated, that clever tactics could overcome raw power, and that free people fighting for their homes were worth more than any number of conscripted soldiers serving a distant king. In our modern world, facing our own challenges and conflicts, the Battle of Salamis remains relevant. It reminds us that underdogs can win, that unity has power, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought not just with weapons, but with ideas about how human beings should live together. The wooden wall that saved Athens wasn't made of timber and nails. It was built from courage, cunning, and an unshakable belief that some things are worth fighting for, no matter what the odds. That's a lesson that will never go out of style.